Hi, everyone. My name is Ann Moss Rogers. I'm a public speaker and I own the blog emotionallynaked.com, which I started after my son's death by suicide in 2015. I've also written a book called Diary of a Broken Mind and a book that's coming out in August called Emotionally Naked, a teacher's guide to preventing suicide and recognizing students at risk. So it was around 2010 when I first heard about Beacon Tree Foundation. And what was happening is that I was trying to find some kind of placement for my son, Charles. He was struggling at that time with what I thought might be mental health issues, but I wasn't sure because nobody had given us any kind of diagnosis, despite my asking for that. And I called a friend of mine and I asked him about therapeutic boarding schools because his son had been to one. And in that conversation, he said, you know what, you should really join the board of Beacon Tree, or at least come and see what we're all about, because we're all about youth mental health. And the founder, Tom, has, something of a similar story to yours. Well, I had been searching desperately for some sort of support or group or someone else who was going through this, because I kept talking to people and they would kind of cut me off mid-sentence and then ask about my older child. And I felt like they were kind of acting like my younger child was dead, and it was very odd. And so I was so desperate to connect with somebody who felt like this was important. So I went to the first Beacon Tree meeting, and I just remember feeling at home. I mean, people were openly talking about mental health and substance misuse, and I hadn't run into that. And it was what I had been looking for because I thought these topics needed to be touched on. And so I ended up joining the board. And not long after I joined the board, I got the news that both my sons were nominated to homecoming court. And it had been a very difficult year of a lot of things with Charles, mostly having to do with substance misuse, that I found out later was tied to depression and thoughts of suicide, but I didn't know the latter part at that time. So this was a fun mama moment, and I was really excited, but I was trying to figure out, well, who would escort my older son or my younger son? And I thought maybe I could do both, and they said that wasn't allowed. So because my son Richard was a senior, I escorted him, and Charles picked his favorite teacher, Miss Fretwell. And that's one of my favorite pictures of the two of them walking across that football field, because he's making her laugh the whole time. And they're both laughing, and I just love that picture. And I remember the look of shock on my face when Richard actually won, because he had done some video his senior year. He'd become quite popular, but Richard had never been like the most popular kid in school. Charles always had. He was the funniest, most popular kid in school. And I remember that moment because it was such a bright spot in a dismal number of years where we struggled. And it wasn't long after that Charles's drug use started to escalate. And that was when I started seriously considering a therapeutic boarding school. I had been researching it before, but I didn't want to spend the money. And our counselor suggested that we kidnap our son out of his bed and take him to a wilderness program. And you don't do this because you've caught your kid with a beer and a joint. You do this because you think your child's life is truly at risk. And it was in wilderness that my son finally got a psychological evaluation. And I thought, how many times did I ask for a psychological evaluation? Except I didn't use those words. How many times did I ask for a diagnosis when I was in front of a mental health professional when I was in Richmond, which would have been a $50 copay? Nobody ever gave me that diagnosis that he suffered from depression. I got it in Wilderness, depression, anxiety, and cannabis dependence. He was self-medicating with drugs and alcohol, basically, is what that meant. And I thought, why didn't I get this locally? And come to find out that if you didn't specifically use that phrase, oftentimes they just didn't do it. Now, if I was going to go in for heart surgery, they do diagnostics, right? Well, they need to do the same for mental health. And I think that's about the time we started to focus on paying for psychological evaluations for youth so that we can get that diagnosis, so we can understand how to treat what it is that child is struggling with. Now, unfortunately, my son went to Wilderness and he went to therapeutic boarding school, and he came back in 2014 having spent about 18 months outside our home in some kind of placement. And it was unfortunate that he went back to the same coping strategies as before, which were drugs and alcohol, and he became addicted to heroin. And my husband and I were sitting in a police car in a parking lot in 2015, and they delivered the news that they had found my son dead that morning. And I remember not being able to breathe. And my husband said, "How did he die?" And I remember thinking, that's such a crazy question. Why would anybody ask that? I mean, he's addicted to heroin, for God's sake. And the policeman said it was a suicide, and the method left no question. And I'm looking in the front seat at my husband's emotional explosion, and it's just not penetrating my head. I just can't believe it. I'm like, Charles Lovelight, he's the funniest, most popular kid in school. How does this happen? And I remember thinking when I went home, I can't survive this. I can't survive this. What am I going to do? I don't know what any of this looks like. And I said, I will survive. I remember just deciding, I don't know what this looks like. I don't know how I'm going to do it, but as bad as it is right now, it will never be as bad as getting the news that part is over. And if I can endure that, I can endure everything, anything. And I thought that I wanted to carry forward my son's legacy of letting other people know they matter, and to help erase the stigma of mental illness and continue my fight. And my Beacon Tree family was there for me the whole way. Nobody ever shunned me. They embraced me. I never felt rejected. And it was just a good place to pour my passion and start to give back, because when you give back, you start to heal. And today I can say that Beacon Tree Foundation has been part of my emotional healing process. And today I still support them and their efforts to pay for childhood evaluations for mental illness, because early intervention works. Thank you.